All right, welcome to our first guest speaker series. I am super excited to announce the first one with Stephanie Greenwood here with me today. So, unraveling the trauma PCOS connection, healing from the inside out. So, I'm super excited to dive into this topic because this really hits home, close to my heart as well as hers. I think we've had, similar experiences with PCOS and the healing journey. So, this is definitely, lived experience and very relatable, and I'm sure for many people. So we're excited to bring this to the masses. So yeah, welcome, Stephanie. I'm super excited to have you here.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here.
So before we get into the nitty-gritty of, trauma, healing PCOS, like really the healing work that goes beyond a lot of the stuff we talk about, like diet, that kind of thing. Um, I would like for you to, introduce yourself, let us know a little bit about you. Why are we even talking about this? How did you find this work?
hmm So my PCOS journey has been pretty long. Well, it started kind of in my 20s where I wasn't really given a diagnosis and I didn't know what was going on in my body. And like when I was, 27, 28, I started learning about the different chemicals in personal care products that can act like estrogen in the body. And I knew that I had estrogen dominance, and so I started looking at, the chemicals in my personal care products, and I ended up starting my own company called Bubble and Be Organic. We make certified organic bath and body products, and I've been doing that now since 2007. And along that journey, my PCOS, as I started eating more organic, getting rid of, the pesticides in my food and the chemicals in my personal care products that can act like estrogen, I did start to see improvements, but I didn't, I would see improvements, but I still had missed periods. I still had a lot of the symptoms associated with PCOS. And years went on. I got stricter with my diet and saw small improvements, but still wasn't all the way there. Finally, in 2015, I realized that I was in an abusive relationship, and I had been since 2001. And I started like working on trying to get out of that relationship. And 2018, I was finally able to get out. And the second that I left, um, well, first of all, I was like in a really bad spot, so I just let my diet go by the wayside. I started drinking beer for the first time in my life and eating frozen grocery store pizza. And even though I went off the rails with my diet and did all the things that they told me not to do, I got better. Simply getting out of that abusive relationship completely changed my hormones. And I started my life over at age 39 and ended up getting unexpectedly pregnant at 41, gave birth at 42. And here we are now. I have a 3-year-old and I'm turning 46 this year. My hormones are much better than they ever were in my 20s and my early 30s before I got out of that abusive relationship. And I started learning about how trauma really affects our hormones. And now I'm doing a master's degree in medical science and working on that very slowly. But I've really found that I really love physiology and endocrinology and neuroendocrinology now.
Wow, such a powerful story. And I can relate so much because my journey as well, PCOS, started with the nutrition piece. I think that's very emphasized. And obviously, it's a foundation. We're not saying, skip that part, like super important. But I think I also I got into the obsession of it, which led to binge eating and just like fear of food. And it went to a place of like, I'm actually not feeling better anymore, sort of like you. Also toxic relationship. And once I sort of, ended that and started to find like my passion with, different things in career and holistic health, things started to really take a turn, and I started to get, lots more support in the emotional, mental health support world. I started to really look into that aspect of health, and that just opened up, so much more. So I can definitely relate to a lot of that. And so I'd love for you to touch on like the link between chronic stress, trauma, and PCOS. And we're definitely going to touch on trauma because trauma is such a broad topic. Like, I think a lot of us may not initially think that we have trauma, but this is a conversation I like to have because it is very broad. But yeah, talk to us about the link between chronic stress, trauma, and PCOS. I know it is like a big one, but wherever you want to start with that.
Yeah. So at the end of, I believe it was 2022, there was a study that came out of South Africa that found that girls that grew up with childhood trauma, that was emotional abuse, not physical abuse, not sexual abuse, but emotional abuse had the highest risk of having PCOS. And I found that that was really interesting. And if you really look at the physiology of that, it makes a lot of sense. Kind of going into the physiology of that, we think of PCOS as maybe an ovarian issue, as that it's a problem with our ovaries. And ovaries obviously have part of it, but the way that I look at it is that it's mostly in the brain that this is happening. And because our hormones are controlled by the master hormone control center called the hypothalamus that sits right above the pituitary. And the hypothalamus tells the pituitary, it sends chemical signals to the pituitary. And the pituitary controls mainly our adrenal glands, our thyroid, and our ovaries. And so when that firing in the hypothalamus gets off, then our ovulation becomes off as well. And it's really kind of interesting. The hypothalamus, when it wants to create FSH, it does slow pulses. And when it wants to create LH, it creates fast pulses of the same chemical. But the pituitary understands that and is able to turn those chemical signals into hormones. And we're finding that in women with PCOS, those chemical signals are just firing, firing, firing. So we usually have way more LH than we do FSH. And luteinizing hormones makes those follicles in the ovary grow and grow and grow, but never fully mature and release. So then we end up with cysts on our ovaries. Well, the hypothalamus, like I said, also controls our adrenals, our stress response. And so because the hypothalamus is prone to stress and it's right sitting there next to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is our circadian rhythms. So that also has something to do with it. But but because it is prone to stress and it also controls our stress response, when we are under a deep amount of stress, a chronic amount of stress, the body will say, well, okay, we're in survival mode. We need to kind of shut down reproduction. Reproduction is not a priority right now. So that signaling becomes basically offline and that wave, those LH pulses, just become very strong. Um, and it's also been found, there have been two studies that have found that women with PCOS, about 50% of them have an adrenal disorder called micronodular adrenocortical hyperplasia. And basically, you've been under so much stress for so long that your adrenal glands have figured out how to create cortisol without waiting for the signal from the pituitary in the brain. And so it's formed these nodules on the adrenal glands. They're just constantly pumping out cortisol, cortisol, cortisol. Cortisol is a very interesting hormone. It is a steroid. It is meant to, like, if you have had to run or to fight, it is there to help repair that damage from that stressful event. If you have no stressful event, if you didn't have to run, you didn't have to fight, the cortisol, it doesn't have anywhere to go. Um, and so that makes me go, aha, emotional abuse creates PCOS, and that's those stress hormones more so than physical or sexual abuse because you're the cortisol actually has something to do. It's like, okay, let's go repair this after, we were physically damaged. But when you're being emotionally abused, it, it's just circulating in your body. And one thing that cortisol tells the body to do is to break down glycogen stores in the liver and raise your blood sugar because we're going, hey, we might have to run, we might have to fight. Our stress response is activated. Let's raise blood sugar because we might have to run. But if you're not running, cortisol goes up, your blood sugar goes up. And now, with that chronic cortisol flowing throughout your body, the insulin receptors on your cells will start to disappear because the body's going, well, cortisol will override those insulin receptors, and cortisol comes along and tells your cells, hey, when insulin comes along, just ignore him. Don't let insulin and glucose into the cells for energy because we need that blood sugar to run or fight. So we lose our insulin sensitivity because of cortisol. And a lot of the time, and then of course, we lose our insulin sensitivity, and then we may end up gaining weight in some cases we don't. But, and a lot of the time we go to the doctor and we've gained weight, which is a symptom of PCOS. And then the doctor tells us that it was the cause and go, oh, well, you just need to lose weight. In the meantime, you have all of this dysfunction going on and inflammation happening and all of this cortisol and everything, and you go to lose weight and have a really hard time with that because of the insulin resistance has made your basal metabolic rate so low that cutting your calories a lot of the time just doesn't work. And then we end up getting stressed about that, which feeds the more cortisol. And then we get mad at ourselves, we get depressed, we get angry that we have this, and it feeds this perpetual cycle of stress and shame and and dysfunction.
Well, I love that breakdown. Thank you so much for all the science. I think this is a really important conversation because, like I said, a lot of the time we might think like, oh, like my childhood was pretty good, or like I'm not too stressed. But I think for the average woman, but person as well, living in the 21st century is pretty stressful. And when we look at like survival mode, oftentimes this is just like just chronically living in scarcity, not enough. And this can show up in so many different ways. Like, for example, the different types of stressors. I think a lot of the time when I work with women too, like a lot of the time I hear like, oh, I'm not that stressed or whatever. And I've totally said this as well. But if we look at like the chemicals we're putting on our bodies, like the toxins are in environment, TV, electronics, blue light exposure, the food, which, is very inflammatory for the most part. Obviously, the different nuances there about like what you're eating. Um, so many stressors like relationship, financial. The list can go on. It could be chemical, physical, emotional, mental. Like you said too, there doesn't actually need to be a tiger in front of us. Like we can literally be thinking about tomorrow, a meeting or something that we have to do, and we can be pumping out these stress hormones. So I think it's also just important to note that like we're living in a stressful time, and we can also create a lot of stress from our minds, and there's so many different components like emotional, mental, physical, chemical. And like you said too, I think it's really important to hone in on we can actually be doing good things, like healthy things that can add stress. This is what happened to me as well at the beginning of my journey, where it was like pretty restrictive eating, hit exercises, spin. Like I was really very, very much into all the exercise, but it was actually too much. And I was doing a lot of masculine dominant strategies, like more of the restrictions, the hit, the intense exercise, even like cold plunge, things like that, that most of these things have been mostly studied on men's physiology versus cycling women. And so it's not that these things can't be good for women, but it's also like there are nuances here, as well as timing and as well as what's going on with you. If you're really in a hormonally imbalanced place, a lot of these strategies can actually just add stress, right, on the body. So I'd love to sort of touch on like, how do we know this is a problem? Like some people might be like, do I need to do testing? Is it like, if I have symptoms, like, how do I know that I need to look at this? What would you say?
Every single person that I have talked to that has PCOS, I've gone like, okay, tell me about your childhood trauma. And then they're like, here's my boatloads of childhood trauma. And they really relate to that. Although I have heard like secondhand of like, no, I got PCOS like after I had a baby, which would be like a physical stressor. Um, but usually people are identify with that, like, yeah, I had a pretty like rough childhood. And a lot of the time the parenting that isn't intentionally abusive ends up being abusive. The spanking that, I grew up in the 80s and spanking was, widespread. That was the thing that you did. And parents were abusing physically less. They're like, yeah, my parents, beat me and I don't want to beat you, but they use shame to control the child. And that breaks that attachment with the developing child. And babies and young children rely on their parents. They rely on that attachment for survival. So even something as early as, being spanked when you are 2 years old and you don't remember it can create that it just begins that stress, begins that state of chronic stress that develops. And then you may not notice it until you're a teenager when your brain completely reprograms itself. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you're a depressed teenager and you're 14 and you don't know what's going on. Um, so anyway, I kind of went on that tangent, but yes, I think that a lot of the time we can be abused and we're not realizing it. I mean, just being in front of social media, especially for young girls nowadays. Donna Jackson Nakazawa's book Girls on the Brink is a great one. If you are a young woman or if you have a teenage daughter, definitely read that book because it does talk about how social media just puts us in that stress state and at a very critical time when we are still developing and our hormones are developing. Um, but I think that, um, but like I said, I was in an abusive relationship for 17 years, and it took me a really long time to realize that it was abusive and that I just thought it was, oh, we just don't get along, or oh, we argue a lot, or all couples argue. And I didn't realize that it was slowly killing me to be in this relationship. And a lot of the time, so many women don't realize that, well, he's not hitting me, but emotional abuse is a bit insidious and you don't realize it until something huge starts to happen. And so I think that if you do have PCOS and you're like, no, I had a pretty easy childhood, really sit and talk to yourself about that and really just sit and meditate and see what comes up. Do you start to cry when you think about that and why? And really have a talk with yourself and figure out, are there people in my life that are abusing me? Are there people in the past that have abused me and I haven't really acknowledged it? And it's sometimes it's our parents, and that's kind of a complex relationship. You can forgive your parents for like the mistakes that they made and the bad advice that they followed. That doesn't fix you, but you can, you don't have to hold it against them for the rest of their life. But I do think that very, very strongly, and everybody that I've talked to that has reached out, like for my resources or my podcast, had this aha moment, like, oh, that has to do with trauma. Okay, yeah, I have trauma.
Yeah, so I'd love to touch on a few things here. I just want to just so that we don't forget like where we were at, because there was a question about the book. If you can repeat the book title. Is
Yes, it's called Girls on the Brink by Donna Jackson Nakazawa.
Girls on the Brink.
Hmm.
Put that in. I don't think I can repeat the name, but
Yeah.
we will put all of the notes as well in the show notes and YouTube video and all of that from the replay, but I just put that in the chat. Yeah, when it comes to trauma, obviously this is like a very multi-layered conversation, but I really want to share some definitions of trauma because I think it really helped me just understand like my own emotional trauma, because everyone has baggage. We just have to be honest, like life is hard and we all have different challenges. And there's like obviously bigger events and smaller events, but it's really what happens internally on a nervous system level, right? So I've heard definitions around like a situation where an individual felt in danger or neglected enough for their body to respond in such a way that it felt overwhelmed. Also, like Gabor Mate, who says that trauma is anything that causes us to disconnect from ourselves, our sense of value from the present moment. It's really that disconnection. Trauma is not only about what has happened to you, but also about not feeling safe to be who you are, to express, or being alone, left alone in your distress. So fearing abandonment. It's what didn't happen sometimes. It's the lack of care. It's the lack of attention, protection, everything you needed to feel safe, but didn't receive. And so a lot of people can talk about like big T trauma, small T trauma. Um, and so little experiences can be just as impactful in different ways for people. So things like whether it's childhood around rejection, fear, panic, feeling unseen, unheard, etc., but also in adulthood, I think we also need to recognize that things like financial scarcity, like obviously events since 2020 in the world have also been like traumatic for many people. Breakups, loss of jobs, loss of loved ones, illness, moving. So many things can cause this sort of disconnection, dysregulation. So I think it's also important to note that we can all be impacted at different times and in different ways. But I really want to talk about the role of the nervous system, how we can really heal on a nervous system somatic level, and if you know what your thoughts are on that. Because oftentimes we can know, like, oh, I know all this stuff that happened and I've talked about it and I've gone through it, which awareness can be helpful. But the thing is, it's really on a body level, right? So oftentimes we are not really addressing the emotions and the connection that we really want to reestablish with ourselves, whether we felt like abandoned in in that certain moment or something else. And I've really worked on this a lot over the years. Somatic counselors are really, fantastic for this kind of work, because essentially, obviously, there's a lot of healing around this on an emotional, mental level, and this can affect every area of your life. But it's also, of course, important for things like PCOS hormones because, like you said, we're in survival mode. So that's like fight, flight, freeze. So our body is focusing on survival. So it doesn't really care about fertility, reproducing, like digesting your food, like, metabolism, like it's going to focus on survival. So that's going to be, and, hair, like hair growth, like it's not focusing on that kind of thing. So we really want to obviously to focus on healing, but we need to come back to the parasympathetic state, which is rest or digest, like, the healing state of the body. So that is a whole mouthful, but I really want to sort of bring that up because I think it's really important to address that piece. And I love to hear what your thoughts are about that.
Absolutely. I think that you have a lot of great points there. And that was very helpful to define what trauma is because sometimes we, like I said, we don't see it and we feel like something is off. And a lot of the times, if you're in an abusive relationship, you start blaming yourself because it's like, oh, you're being too sensitive. And you're like, oh, and you sit there and psychoanalyze yourself, and you're, oh, maybe I'm feeling this way because of this. Maybe it's just a childhood wound and it's all my fault. And so it really is so important to listen to your body. And are you disconnected? And are you stressed out? Are you carrying tension? Are you like this all the time? Do you have neck pain? Do you have headaches because you're like this all the time? And our body will send us messages and it will continue to send us messages until we hear it. A lot of the time, like just a week ago, I was able to meditate and make my cramps go away. And that can be that sounds crazy, like especially like I also have adenomyosis. So it's kind of like endometriosis. So sometimes I have like excruciating cramps. And pain is literally a messenger. When you put your hand on a hot burner, and you feel that heat and it makes you pull your hand back because there was that nerve sensation that went up your arm and through your spinal cord and up into your brain and then back down to move the arm. And pain, that is all that pain is a messenger. It is an electrochemical signal going through your cells, and it is trying to tell you something. And the same thing goes for any pain in your body. And if you if you lean into it, if you have extreme menstrual cramps, I suggest lean into it really hard and go for as long as you can without taking pain medicine. Now, I know that might sound scary, but do it as an experiment. Go to the pain when you're experiencing it and say, I'm not afraid of you. And say, I embrace you. Bring it on. I can handle it. Bring it on. And see what comes up for you. And sit and meditate and go, okay, why am I having this pain? What is my pain trying to tell me? And listen to your body. Maybe if I had listened to my body, I wouldn't have spent 17 years in an abusive relationship. And I would have said, hey, something is going on here to make me feel this way. I'm feeling unseen. I'm feeling unheard. I'm all alone here and I'm scared. And I was able to make my cramps go away just last week using this method. I had taken an Advil. It had been an hour. It hadn't touched the pain at all. I lay down on the couch and I said, okay, what are you trying to tell me? And I listened to the messages from my body saying, hey, you know what? There's some things that are bugging you. There's some things that you need to address in your life. There's some, not anything major, but hey, you need to have some conversations with some people about certain things little things that need to change. And you need to take care of yourself a little bit more and you need to stop neglecting yourself so much. And once I heard those messages and once I said to my body, I'm not afraid of the pain, it completely released. And then I was like, in the middle of that meditation, I was like, oh, the cramps are gone. I started to get afraid. I was like, oh, but what if they come back? As soon as I had that thought, it was really interesting. The cramps came right back. And I was like, okay, I'm going to have to be not afraid of this pain. So I had to go back in and I had to go, okay, I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid of you, pain. Bring it on. Bring it on as strong as you've got. And it did. And then it released. And I was fine for the rest of the day. It really is amazing how much our brain has control over our body when we, allow it to have. But at the same time, like you said, you can know all about trauma. I can go on all day about how physiological processes of how trauma affects our bodies, but I still have trauma. It doesn't heal me to know about trauma. This is all stuff that is stored in the body, like you said. It is, and it also will keep you from healing. It is really hard to make a phone call to get into therapy because you're like, no, it's not safe. It's not safe to talk to somebody about your feeling. It's not safe to do that. It's not safe to talk to somebody in general. And so your body can stop you from doing those things. Your body can stop you from healing because it's prioritizing safety when you've been in that traumatic state for so long. So doing the somatic work it's so easy once you get into it, and it's so amazing once you start to do somatic exercises and meditation and yoga, and it feels so amazing when you can actually relax enough to get into it and get into the vibe of it and do that healing. It's so very important. It's if somebody came to me and said, "Hey, I have PCOS, what should I do?" That would be the number one thing, not like, "Okay, let's put you on this special diet, let's get you exercising, let's do this." Let's get you feeling safe in your body and not disassociated from your life and from your reality.
Yeah, I agree. And it's really coming back to like finding safety internally because that's really a foundation. And being able to, process these emotions because it is all energy that's affecting our tissues, right? So I think so many tools, and we could talk about tools in a few minutes, but so many tools can be really helpful and, can be really great for somebody on their journey. And it's really just about learning how to actually tune back into our bodies, like regulate our nervous systems, because we haven't been taught that. Like, I wish people were taught this in schools. Like, I hope it does come to schools because this
Mhm.
is how we change, relationships and entire countries, like generations, in terms of like how we react, but also like our health, obviously. What we create, financially and et cetera, because it all is really about a nervous system capacity. So it really affects our entire lives. And the cool thing is that when you do this work, it's really getting to root causes of healing, not just like dis-ease and hormonal conditions, and pretty much every condition on the planet, let's be honest, is affected by your nervous system, but it also has a domino effect on relationships. What you choose in your life in terms of, partner, friendships, career, what you're able to attract, like it really does come down to that. So the beautiful thing is it's going to really create a domino. Um, but obviously, there's different layers to healing, and everyone has their own timeline and going at their pace. And I think it's really important to look into being able to learn, these things on your own, not just like practices that you can find through like yoga, meditation, breath work. There's so many guided somatic practices too online, great teachers, courses, but then also having somebody one-on-one who you really can trust and that, feels safe. I think it's really important to have somebody who's trauma informed and all of that kind of thing.
Mhm.
But it's true, the mind can really influence the fear response. And I've really, it's mind blowing when you talk about this. Some people are just like, you're wacko. But I remember I've had cramps too in the past, and it was just like, my go-to is breath work. That really helps me get out of my body, get out of my mind into my body, helps to release stuff. Like sometimes I'll just start crying and I'm like, oh, that was in there. Like it was really stuck. And I just felt like emotionally stuck all day. And then I do this breath work and I'm like, oh, I feel so much lighter. And one time, like the cramps completely disappeared, and I was just like, this is wild. Um, and so, breath work can be a great thing as well. But one thing I also want to touch on is like the compassion on the healing journey, because it's really about, like you said, like looking at yourselves, taking like a good look at ourselves, because oftentimes we don't have the time and space to do that. Like we're go, 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 we're taking care of this person and that person. We're like trying to survive, pay the bills, like all of these things going on. And oftentimes for women, I see a lot of the time, I don't think I've ever worked with someone who hasn't had some sort of like, they're not really taking care of themselves, or they take care of pretty much everybody else, but they haven't really, they sort of been neglecting their joy, their self-care, etc. And it's really about looking at these things like, are you ignoring your feelings? Are you holding space for yourself? Are you setting those boundaries? Because a lot of the time we are saying no to things that we want to say yes to, and we're saying yes to things that we want to say no to as women. I think that's a big part around like the people pleasing conditioning, and what doesn't actually feel aligned in your life. Because I know we've talked a lot about relationships, and that can be a big thing, a big factor here. But I know that when you ask yourself the question, like, is this actually aligned for me? Like, you will know. You will know in your gut, like, this person is not for me. This career is not for me. This country is not for me. Like, you need to actually ask yourself, and that's like the hard part about it, because sometimes we ignore these things because it's easier. Because if I say, yeah, this person, this country, this career, this whatever is not for me, then I kind of have to take action, right? Because it's like I'm not just gonna be like, I'm not gonna do anything about it. But that is really the part of the healing journey. It's sometimes asking really uncomfortable questions. It doesn't mean you have to change your entire life right now, but I think the awareness is really key, and being honest with ourselves. And this brings me to the point of why you can't avoid looking at your life. So your relationship choices, your career, your fulfillment, like your joy, your purpose, if you really want to heal your PCOS. And today we're talking about PCOS, but this could really be anything else. Because like you said, the body will always give you feedback. Like it's always sending signals. And oftentimes the wake-up call is the health crisis, even if there's like choices that you think might not be related. I love for you to, I know we touched a little bit on this, but if you have anything else you want to add, I'd love to hear.
Yeah, we live in a time that allows us to be comfortable in uncomfortable situations. We have all kinds of medications to dull our pain, whether it's physical or emotional pain. And we have drugs that will keep us from menstruating if menstruation becomes too painful. And it allows us to be comfortable when maybe we shouldn't be. And I don't want to say that we shouldn't be using the drugs that can enhance our lives. That's a personal decision. But I want to challenge everybody to get uncomfortable for a minute. Don't take the pain medicine. And now, if you're on antidepressants, don't stop doing that unless you're under, professional care. but reconsider taking birth control to cover up your PCOS symptoms if you have PCOS, because that's like you go to the doctor, they say, okay, let's get you on birth control and get your periods regulated. It's covering up the symptoms, but not actually fixing them, and it's allowing you to be comfortable but missing out on the pain. You're missing out on the pain and the messages that that pain will give you. The messages that that pain is telling you to change something in your life or something that's screaming out to be healed. And if we continue to cover up the pain, whether it's emotional or physical pain, it will show up in other places. It will show up as an autoimmune disorder. It'll show up as a thyroid disorder. If we continue to allow ourselves to be comfortable in a state of fight or flight all the time and being in that state of chronic stress and being comfortable with it at the same time. So we have to really look at our bodies because again, going back up to the hypothalamus, it also controls the thyroid, controls our stress response, our ovaries, and our thyroid. And a lot of the times we have thyroid issues alongside our PCOS, or we end up developing an autoimmune disorder or, an autoimmune disorder that affects the thyroid, like Hashimoto's. And they're all connected with chronic stress that we've been in for so, so long. And our bodies are trying to tell us, hey, we need help. Whether you believe that's your inner child or whether you believe it's your body, whatever you believe it is, we have to listen to it. And I want to challenge everybody, find a small way that you can get uncomfortable and listen to your body and what it's trying to tell you.
I love that. And just as a caveat, like you mentioned, like this is not a conversation about like take the med, don't take the med. Like obviously, like,
Yeah.
be safe
Yeah.
and listen to, talk to your doctor about all that. But um, I think it is really important to talk about like it's sort of a band-aid approach that's going on largely in the conventional medical system, unfortunately, and especially with PCOS, it's sort of like we're just handing these out like candy, and it's just like, oh, you have this symptom, take this, and then hopefully it masks that, and then maybe like 3 years later, another symptom pops up. It's kind of like playing whack-a-mole. I, started going on birth control, especially for the cystic acne for PCOS, and then it was just one thing after the other. And it's really doing a disservice when we just stop there and we're like, just take this versus like, why is this going on? We really want to get to the root. And it's very
Mhm.
disempowering because we're sort of like in this paradigm of, well, I guess you just have to take this pill until you get pregnant or you have this problem later on. And when we come to that, we'll deal with it. But right now, we'll just give you this pill. Whereas like there are root causes and this your body is not doing this because it's lazy, it's dumb, it's broken, you're aging, whatever. Like we need to address the root causes, which are physical, mental, emotional. Like there will be multiple components, which is why I think it's often very important to also highlight that there are multiple root causes. It's not usually one thing, but we can get there. And I think you and I are both testaments to that, and many other women, especially like in the Facebook group that we're in. But the diagnosis is really not the cause. It's literally, for me, it's like a symptom of like, it's really a collection of signs and symptoms, but we're not saying like, this is it, this is the cause of your symptoms, because that's super disempowering. Um, so yeah, I know you and I are really about the whole conversation of like band-aiding. Maybe sometimes it is um critical for some people to use like band-aids for the time being to manage pain and things like that. But we want to investigate and work on the root causes at the same time and then wean off those sorts of things. So that was just sort of my rant with that.
Yeah.
But I'd love to hear what you would like to add in terms of like people are interested in trauma healing, emotional regulation, the things we talked about, processing these emotions and these events and these, experiences. What are some of the tools that you recommend, maybe that you've experienced? I know we talked about like meditation, yoga, um, breath work. There can be like obviously like somatic counselors and different practitioners that can help you. But yeah, I'd love to hear what you would love to say about that.
There are so many great healing modalities, and there's no right one for everyone. It's about like finding one that feels right for you on your particular journey. In the files section of the groups, of the group, I have my PCOS Thrive Guide linked. And in the final pages of that, I've kind of got a directory of a whole bunch of different modalities that you can look into. There's lifespan integration. That's a good one that you can do with a therapist. There's, obviously different somatic programs. Donna Jackson Nakazawa, Girls on the Brink that I mentioned earlier, she has a healing program that's a journaling program that's really great. There's even acupuncture, acupressure, Reiki. There's so many just beautiful things. And the honestly, the biggest challenge is getting started. Like how many times do we, and I'm guilty of this myself. You buy it, you're like, oh, I found the healing program, and you buy it, and then you don't even start it because you're in such still a state of retraction and trying to stay safe that you can't get started on it. So find something that will help you ease into your healing journey and that feels good, that you can do, that's sustainable and that feels right for you. But yeah, I have a link to my Thrive Guide that, and it talks about diet, it talks about exercise, but it mainly is not mainly, but diet and exercise is important. But the most important thing about diet and exercise is to do it in with the right mindset and in a healing way, not in a way of like, I can't eat this because I'm fat, or I can't eat this because I have PCOS, and in a punishing, restrictive way that only reinforces the shame and those negative neural pathways. And exercising, don't exercise if you're not enjoying it. Find exercise and movements that feel good to your body. Don't go for a walk and cry the whole time because you hate it, which I've been guilty of myself. Like, I've got to exercise and I hate this because, again, that's only reinforcing the stress response. So dance instead of running, or do something that you really enjoy, and that might take some self-exploration to find out what that thing is that you really enjoy. Um, but yes, there's that's all in my Thrive Guide that's linked to in the files section of the group, and I can also give you the link that you can post at the end too.
Yeah, for sure. Send me all the links. I love that. Yeah, I totally agree. I've also like things I think it's also important to have different tools because like for example, for me, I've gone through like years of addressing this and using different courses, programs, tools like coaches. I work with somatic counselor. I do meditations, breath work, walks, EFT, so many different things. So it's like it's not just like a one and done thing. It's like continuously because we're all on the human journey. But it's also like different tools, like what can I use on my own? Where can I have somebody support me through this? Because sometimes there's some messier things to move through and somebody who can really guide you through that. I also like the podcast Somatic Healing Meditations. I think that's a great way to start to get introduced to like somatic stuff. There's so many other resources out there. Feel free to message us if you're ever like, wanting help to sort of get started with this or recommendations, but I will put the links in the show notes. And yeah, I know we have a few people left live. If you guys want to, unmute or put a question in the chat, if you have any questions, please let us know. Otherwise, Stephanie, if you have any last thoughts on how to wrap up this huge conversation,
Yeah,
let us know.
it certainly is a big topic, and I guess my biggest message is to listen to your body and and do whatever you're doing to treat your PCOS in just the most loving and nourishing way, the most loving and nourishing way possible. Like for what you're eating, don't think of things and like, oh, I have to avoid that, avoid, avoid, avoid. But like, look at this beautiful, nourishing food that I'm giving myself because I love myself. And I'm going to eat well and take care of myself and do this healing movement because I love myself and I want to take care of myself. And treat yourself as a loving parent would lovingly treat their own child.
I love that. Yeah. It really comes from the intention, the energy behind it, which can really change everything. There's this study where sort of looking at the water crystals in terms of like how they spoke to them. I'm sure you know about that one. I forget the name of it, but the water crystals basically change whether it was like positive or negative, and we've seen that with plants too. So I mean, obviously we're also going to be affected by that. You know, we're made of water, we're energy. So it really does play a big part. And this is, I think it's also important to just, you know, acknowledge this is a journey. It's not, it doesn't happen overnight. It's not a linear process, but there's definitely a lot that can change quickly as well. And so thank you so much, Stephanie, for, you know, bringing this conversation. And obviously I encourage any of you who resonated to, you know, reach out, check out the links if that resonates. If you have any questions, you want to message us privately, definitely do that as well. Otherwise, we'd love to hear your thoughts, you know, in the group, in the chat. But I thank you so much for coming on here today and for bringing this really important conversation to us. And I will put all of the links for Stephanie in the YouTube video that will come out with this and the podcast, so you guys can check her out further. And yeah, I know you have a lot to offer with all of your products and programs and the services. So thank you so much for what you do.
Thank you so much for having me on. It was a great discussion.